The richest people in America will let their own mother die lonely before they let a poor woman sit at their table. Claire Bennett heard those words whispered by one of the maids the moment she stepped out of the city bus and stared at the massive Caldwell estate glowing under the cold October rain. She tightened her grip on her 6-year-old daughter Lily's hand while water dripped from the edge of her worn gray coat. The mansion looked like something from a movie, stretching across acres of perfectly trimmed lawns with marble fountains and windows taller than the apartment building Claire had been evicted from 2 weeks earlier. Lily looked up at her with nervous blue eyes. "Mom, are we really working here?" Claire forced a smile even though her stomach twisted with fear. "Just for tonight," she whispered, even though she prayed it would become longer than that. She had $37 left in her checking account, half a tank of gas in her old Toyota Corolla, and exactly 4 days before the motel manager locked them out for unpaid rent. The caregiving agency had called that morning with an emergency overnight assignment at the Caldwell estate. Wealthy family. Elderly patient. Difficult environment. High pay. Claire had accepted before the woman on the phone even finished speaking. A tall man in a black suit opened the front door before Claire could knock twice. His eyes moved slowly from her soaked shoes to Lily's small backpack. "You brought your child?" he asked flatly. Claire swallowed her embarrassment. "I'm sorry. Her babysitter canceled and I didn't have anyone else." The man looked irritated but stepped aside. "Mrs. Caldwell is upstairs. Mr. Caldwell hates delays." Claire nodded quickly and guided Lily inside. The warmth of the mansion hit her instantly, carrying the scent of polished wood and expensive candles. Crystal chandeliers reflected across white marble floors so spotless Claire became painfully aware of the muddy water beneath her shoes. Somewhere deeper in the house, people were laughing loudly over music and clinking glasses. A party. Claire realized the family was entertaining guests, while the elderly woman upstairs needed a caregiver. Before she could think more about it, a sharp female voice echoed through the hallway. "You must be the replacement nurse." Claire turned and saw a tall blonde woman descending the staircase in a silk dress that probably cost more than Claire earned in 2 months. Vanessa Caldwell. Even without introductions, Claire could immediately tell who she was. Wealth radiated from her confidence. Judgment radiated from her eyes. Vanessa paused halfway down the stairs when she noticed Lily. "This is not a daycare," she said coldly. Claire lowered her voice politely. "I understand. She'll stay quiet. I really need this job." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Everyone who comes into this house needs something." Claire felt heat rise into her face but remained silent. She had learned long ago that poor women survived by swallowing humiliation. Vanessa finally motioned upstairs. "Mother's room is the last door on the left. Don't touch anything that doesn't belong to you." As Claire climbed the staircase, Lily squeezed her hand tighter. "Mom, those people are mean," she whispered softly. Claire bent down and brushed wet hair away from Lily's face. "Sometimes rich people forget how to be kind," she murmured. Upstairs, the music from the party faded into silence. The hallway grew dimmer, colder. At the very end sat a single wooden door slightly open. Claire pushed it gently and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of medicine and lavender. An elderly woman rested near the window beneath a cream-colored blanket, her silver hair glowing softly in the lamplight. She looked fragile, almost ghost-like, but her tired eyes immediately focused on Claire instead of the medical equipment beside the bed. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Eleanor Caldwell gave a weak smile and said quietly, "You're the first person tonight who looked at me instead of my house." Claire felt something tighten painfully in her chest. She walked closer and offered a gentle smile of her own. "I'm Claire," she said softly. "And I'm here to take care of you." Behind her, downstairs laughter exploded again through the mansion, while Eleanor slowly reached for Claire's hand like a woman drowning, who had finally found something solid to hold on to. Claire spent the next hour quietly organizing Eleanor Caldwell's medication beside the large antique bed while Lily sat cross-legged near the fireplace coloring on the back of an old grocery receipt Claire had pulled from her purse. Outside the bedroom windows, Rain continued tapping softly against the glass, but inside the room, the noise from the downstairs party felt far away, almost like another world. Eleanor watched Claire carefully as she adjusted the blankets around her shoulders with gentle hands. "Most caregivers talk too much," Eleanor said weakly. "Or they avoid looking at me because they are afraid of old age." Claire gave a small smile while checking the thermometer. "I am not afraid of old people," she replied quietly. "I think lonely people are harder to look at." Eleanor's expression changed slightly at those words. For the first time that evening, her tired eyes softened. "And what makes you think I am lonely?" Claire hesitated for a moment before answering. "Your family is downstairs celebrating while you are upstairs alone." Silence settled over the room. Then Eleanor let out a dry laugh that sounded almost painful. "You notice too much." Claire lowered her eyes politely. "It is part of the job." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She had spent years recognizing loneliness because she carried it herself. After her divorce, most friends disappeared. Bills piled up. Long shifts at hospitals turned into temporary caregiving assignments after the medical center cut staff. Every month became another struggle to keep Lily safe and fed. She understood what it felt like to exist in a room full of people and still feel invisible. Eleanor slowly turned her attention toward Lily. "How old is your daughter?" 6, Claire answered. "She loves drawing and peanut butter sandwiches." Lily looked up shyly from the floor. "And pancakes," she added. Eleanor smiled faintly. "A very important detail." For the next few minutes, the room felt strangely peaceful. Claire brushed Eleanor's silver hair gently while Lily showed her crayon drawings of flowers and little houses with crooked windows. Eleanor stared at the child with an expression Claire could not fully understand, almost like grief mixed with warmth. Finally Eleanor whispered, "My children stopped bringing their children to visit years ago. They say this room depresses them." Claire glanced toward the closed bedroom door, hearing another burst of laughter downstairs. Crystal glasses clinked somewhere below while expensive music echoed through the mansion. Eleanor noticed Claire listening and shook her head sadly. "My family loves appearances," she murmured. "Beautiful dinners. Beautiful clothes. Beautiful lies." Before Claire could respond, the bedroom door suddenly opened. A tall man stepped inside, removing his suit jacket as he walked. The air in the room shifted immediately. He looked to be in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, composed, and painfully handsome in the polished way wealthy men often were. Ethan Caldwell barely glanced at Claire before focusing on his mother. "How are you feeling tonight?" he asked calmly. Eleanor looked away toward the rain outside the window. "Better now." Ethan's eyes moved toward Claire, then Lily. There was no warmth in his expression, only caution. "I was told you brought your child into the house." Claire straightened slightly. "I apologize, Mr. Caldwell. I did not have another option tonight." Ethan nodded once but remained unreadable. "This job requires professionalism." Claire felt humiliation rise again but kept her voice steady. "I understand." Lily quietly lowered her crayons, sensing the tension. Eleanor suddenly spoke with surprising firmness. "The child stays." Ethan looked at his mother in silence. "Mother, the child stays," Eleanor repeated. "She is quieter than half the adults downstairs." For a brief second, Claire thought she saw the corner of Ethan's mouth almost move, but the expression vanished quickly. He stepped closer to the bed and adjusted Eleanor's blanket with careful hands that did not match his cold voice. "You should rest." Eleanor looked directly at him. "You should too. You work too much." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Someone has to keep this family together." Eleanor's eyes darkened with sadness. "No, Ethan. Someone has to remind this family how to love each other." The room fell silent again. Ethan looked uncomfortable for the first time since entering. His gaze shifted briefly toward Claire, almost as if he wondered whether she had already heard too much. Then downstairs, a woman's loud laughter echoed through the hallway, followed by Vanessa calling Ethan's name impatiently. Ethan stepped back toward the door. Before leaving, he paused beside Claire. My mother can be emotionally attached to people very quickly, he said quietly. Do not mistake kindness for trust. Claire met his eyes for the first time. I am not here for trust, Mr. Caldwell, she answered softly. I am here because your mother deserves someone who cares whether she makes it through the night. Ethan stared at her for a moment, unable to answer immediately. Then he walked out without another word while Eleanor watched the closed door with tired disappointment. A few seconds later, Lily climbed onto the edge of the chair beside the bed and whispered innocently, Your son looks sad all the time. Eleanor gave a weak smile and gently touched the little girl's hand. That is because money can buy comfort, she whispered softly, but it cannot fix an empty heart. Claire barely slept that night. Eleanor's coughing came in waves every few hours, and each time Claire helped her sip water or adjusted the pillows beneath her shoulders while Lily slept curled beneath a spare blanket near the fireplace. Around 4 in the morning, the mansion finally became quiet after the downstairs party ended. Expensive heels stopped clicking across marble floors. Car engines faded from the driveway. Silence settled over the estate like a heavy curtain. Claire stood near the bedroom window watching rain slide down the glass while exhaustion burned behind her eyes. She had worked double shifts before, but something about this house felt different. It was not the size of it. It was the emptiness. Every room downstairs had looked perfect, yet none of them had felt warm. Eleanor stirred softly in bed. You should rest too, she whispered. Claire shook her head gently. I am all right. Eleanor studied her face for a moment. You are very good at pretending. Claire looked down at her hands and gave a tired smile. Single mothers become experts at pretending. Eleanor slowly nodded as if she understood more than Claire expected. Where is Lily's father? Claire hesitated. She rarely discussed her past with strangers, especially wealthy strangers who often assumed poor women made bad choices. But something about Eleanor's voice felt safe. He left when Lily was 2. Claire admitted quietly. He said raising a child was not the life he wanted. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. And yet he walked away from the best part of himself. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest, but before she could answer, a knock interrupted them. The door opened and Vanessa stepped inside carrying a cup of coffee in one hand and irritation on her face. Her eyes immediately landed on Lily sleeping near the fireplace. She is still here? Claire stood quickly. I was going to take her home this morning before my shift ended. Vanessa set her coffee down sharply. This is not some homeless shelter, Claire. Eleanor's expression hardened instantly. Enough, Vanessa. But Vanessa ignored her mother completely. Do you know how this looks? Staff members bringing children into the estate? What happens next? Friends sleeping in guest rooms? Claire felt humiliation crawl up her neck again. I would never disrespect your home, she said softly. Vanessa crossed her arms. Women in your position always say that. The sentence hit Claire harder than she expected. Women in your position. Not her name. Not her effort. Just another poor woman standing too close to wealth. Before Claire could respond, Eleanor spoke in a voice far stronger than her frail body suggested. You spend more money on one handbag than this woman probably earns in a month, and yet she has shown me more kindness in one night than you have all year. Vanessa's face tightened with embarrassment and anger. Mother, you are being manipulated. Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. If kindness feels like manipulation to you, that says more about this family than it does about Claire. Vanessa grabbed her coffee again. You always choose strangers over your own children. Then she turned and walked out, her heels striking the hardwood floor with sharp, angry sounds. The room became quiet again except for the rain outside. Claire looked uncomfortable. I am sorry, she murmured. Eleanor slowly shook her head. Do not apologize for exposing ugly truths. A few hours later, sunlight finally pushed through the storm clouds. Claire carefully brushed Lily's hair in the private bathroom while the little girl yawned sleepily. Can we stay another night? Lily asked hopefully. Claire smiled sadly. This is work, sweetheart. Not home. But even as she said it, Claire realized something strange. For the first time in months, she did not feel invisible. When they returned to Eleanor's room, they found Ethan standing near the window reviewing papers on his tablet. Morning light reflected across his crisp white shirt, making him look more like a magazine cover than a real person. He barely looked up when Claire entered. The agency informed me you stayed overnight, he said calmly. Claire nodded. Your mother needed monitoring. Ethan glanced toward Eleanor, who appeared more rested than the night before. Her breathing does seem better. Eleanor smirked faintly. That is because someone actually stayed with me. Ethan ignored the comment and focused on Claire again. Most caregivers quit after one shift here. Claire adjusted Lily's jacket quietly. Most people do not desperately need the paycheck. Ethan studied her for a moment, almost as if he was trying to decide whether her honesty offended him or impressed him. Downstairs, the sound of dishes and staff preparing breakfast drifted upward through the mansion. Claire suddenly realized she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. Her stomach tightened painfully, but she tried not to show it. Unfortunately, Lily looked toward the hallway and whispered innocently, Mom, I smell pancakes. Ethan's eyes moved toward Claire immediately. Claire felt embarrassed again. We are fine, she said quickly. But Eleanor looked directly at her son. Feed them. Ethan remained silent for a second before finally setting his tablet down. The kitchen staff is preparing breakfast in the dining room, he said stiffly. You and Lily may join them before leaving. Claire almost refused out of pride, but Lily's hopeful expression stopped her. Thank you, Claire answered softly. As she guided Lily toward the door, she heard Eleanor quietly say something behind her. You see it too, do not you? Ethan answered carefully. See what? Eleanor looked toward Claire and Lily walking together down the hallway. The difference between people who perform kindness and people who actually live it. Breakfast at the Caldwell estate felt less like a meal and more like a performance. Claire sat stiffly at the far end of the massive dining table while Lily stared wide-eyed at the rows of silver trays filled with pancakes, eggs, fresh fruit, pastries, and bacon. The chandelier above them sparkled against polished marble floors, and uniformed staff moved quietly around the room like invisible shadows. Claire had spent years stretching cans of soup into 2 dinners, so seeing this much food prepared for only a handful of people felt unreal. Mom, Lily whispered softly, this orange juice tastes different. Claire smiled faintly. That is because it is probably fresh squeezed. Across the room, Vanessa sat scrolling through her phone without acknowledging them while 2 older relatives discussed investment properties in Aspen as though Claire and Lily did not exist. Ethan entered a few minutes later wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather portfolio beneath one arm. Every conversation at the table seemed to pause when he walked in. Claire immediately noticed something she had not expected. No one here looked at Ethan with affection. They looked at him with dependence. Ethan took his seat near the center of the table and glanced briefly toward his mother's empty chair. Has she eaten yet? He asked one of the staff members. Not yet, sir. Mrs. Caldwell requested Miss Bennet bring breakfast upstairs later. Ethan nodded once before opening his tablet. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. Mother is becoming emotionally attached to temporary employees again. Ethan did not react. Claire stayed overnight because Mother's breathing worsened. Vanessa gave a dry laugh. Funny how her breathing improved the moment a struggling single mother arrived with a child. Claire felt the insult immediately but lowered her eyes toward her coffee. She had learned that wealthy people often disguise cruelty as sophistication. Lily quietly reached for Claire's hand under the table. Ethan finally looked up from his tablet. Enough, Vanessa. His voice was calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to shift instantly. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. I am just being realistic. You know exactly how these situations end. Somebody cries about bills, Mother becomes sentimental, and suddenly they expect to become part of the family. Claire forced herself to speak calmly. I am only here to work. Vanessa smirked. That is what they always say. Before Claire could respond, Lily looked innocently across the table and asked, Why are rich people always angry? Silence dropped over the entire dining room. One of the servers nearly froze in place holding a coffee pot. Claire's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Lily, she whispered quickly. But Ethan unexpectedly lowered his eyes for a second, almost hiding amusement. Vanessa, however, looked horrified. Excuse me? Lily shrugged softly. My mom says sad people sometimes act mean because they forgot how to be happy. Claire wanted to disappear beneath the table. I am so sorry, she said quickly. But Ethan suddenly closed his tablet and stood from his chair. I have a meeting downtown, he announced calmly. Claire, before you leave today, stop by my office. I want to discuss extending your contract. Vanessa looked stunned. Ethan, seriously? He adjusted his watch without looking at her. Mother has not slept peacefully in weeks. Last night she did. Then he walked out of the dining room while several relatives exchanged surprised glances. Vanessa stared coldly at Claire after he left. Do not misunderstand what is happening here, she said quietly. You are staff. Nothing more. Claire met her eyes calmly for the first time. I never asked to be anything else. Upstairs, Eleanor smiled when Claire wheeled in the breakfast tray. I heard Lily caused trouble at breakfast. Lily climbed onto the edge of the bed, grinning proudly. I was helping. Eleanor laughed harder than Claire had seen yet, and the sound warmed the entire room. Claire stared in surprise because the elderly woman suddenly looked years younger when she smiled genuinely. You should laugh more, Claire said softly while pouring tea. Eleanor's smile faded slightly. This house does not give many reasons for it. Claire handed her the cup carefully. Maybe that can change. Over the next several hours, something unexpected began happening inside the mansion. Eleanor asked Claire to read aloud from an old novel she had loved as a teenager. Lily sat beside the bed drawing pictures while Eleanor corrected her coloring choices with playful seriousness. At one point, Claire found herself laughing quietly after Lily insisted the giant mansion needed more dogs and less angry people. Even Eleanor nearly spilled her tea laughing at that. Around noon, Ethan returned unexpectedly from his meeting and stopped outside the partially open bedroom door. Inside, he saw his mother smiling while Lily placed paper flower crowns on both women's heads. Claire was laughing too, the sound soft and natural, completely different from the artificial laughter downstairs during last night's party. Ethan remained motionless in the hallway for several seconds. Because for the first time in a very long time, his mother's room no longer sounded like a place waiting for death. It sounded alive. By the third day at the Caldwell estate, Claire began noticing patterns inside the mansion that nobody talked about openly. Every morning, expensive cars rolled through the circular driveway carrying lawyers, investors, and relatives dressed in designer clothing. Every afternoon, the staff moved silently through the halls while family members argued behind closed office doors about company shares, trust funds, and public image. Yet somehow, almost nobody spent more than a few minutes with Eleanor unless cameras or guests were nearby. Claire saw it clearly now. Eleanor was treated less like a mother and more like a fragile symbol the family was trying to manage. But inside the upstairs bedroom, away from the polished performances downstairs, something entirely different was growing. Lily had started calling Eleanor Miss Ellie, after Eleanor confessed she hated being called Mrs. Caldwell, because it sounded cold. Every afternoon the three of them sat near the bedroom windows while autumn sunlight stretched across the carpet. Claire read novels aloud while Lily colored pictures beside the bed and Eleanor listened with peaceful eyes closed. Sometimes Eleanor shared stories about Ethan as a little boy before money changed everything around them. He used to build forts out of couch cushions, Eleanor said one afternoon with a faint smile. He cried for 2 hours after finding an injured bird in the garden. Claire looked surprised. That does not sound like the man downstairs now. Eleanor's smile faded slightly. Success teaches some people confidence. It teaches others distance. That evening, Claire stayed late after helping Eleanor fall asleep. The mansion had become unusually quiet because most of the family attended a charity gala downtown. Ethan was the only one still home, locked inside his office handling company calls. Claire sat alone in the staff kitchen reheating canned soup she had brought from the motel while Lily slept on a small couch nearby wrapped in a borrowed blanket. The kitchen itself was larger than Claire's entire apartment from 2 years ago, yet she still felt embarrassed opening her dented soup container beside polished granite countertops and professional appliances. She quietly stirred the soup while reviewing overdue bills on her phone. Past due notices filled the screen. Rent. Utilities. Medical debt from Lily's pneumonia last winter. Claire closed her eyes briefly, fighting exhaustion. You know the chefs would make you something if you asked? Claire nearly jumped at the sound of Ethan's voice behind her. He stood near the doorway without his suit jacket, sleeves rolled to his elbows after what looked like a very long day. Claire quickly locked her phone screen. I did not want to bother anyone. Ethan glanced toward the soup container. That does not look like dinner. Claire gave a small embarrassed smile. It was on sale. Ethan walked to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water before leaning quietly against the counter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strangely less uncomfortable than before. Finally, Ethan looked toward the sleeping child on the couch. Lily seems happy here. Claire followed his gaze. Children are happy anywhere they feel safe. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly at those words. Were you not safe before? Claire hesitated. Safe enough. Just unstable. Ethan nodded slowly as though he understood instability better than she expected. My father built this company from nothing, he said quietly. When I was young, he worked 18 hours a day. By the time we became wealthy, he barely knew his own family anymore. Claire looked at him carefully. And now? Ethan let out a tired breath. Now everyone fights over the empire he left behind. Claire studied him for a moment before speaking softly. That sounds lonely too. Ethan looked at her differently then, almost caught off guard by her honesty. Most people probably spoke to him with fear, admiration, or calculation. Claire spoke to him like he was simply human. Before he could answer, a weak cough echoed from upstairs through the hallway monitor speaker. Claire immediately stood. That is Eleanor. She moved quickly toward the stairs, but Ethan followed her without hesitation. Upstairs they found Eleanor struggling to sit upright while trying to catch her breath. Claire calmly adjusted the oxygen tubing and rubbed Eleanor's back gently while speaking in a soothing voice. Slow breaths. You are all right. I am right here. Ethan stood frozen near the doorway watching the scene unfold. Claire never panicked. She never acted impatient. Even after hours of work, exhaustion, and humiliation from his family, she treated his mother with genuine care. Eleanor finally relaxed after several difficult moments, and reached weakly for Claire's hand. Do not leave tonight, she whispered softly. Claire squeezed her hand reassuringly. I will stay. Ethan looked toward Claire as she carefully tucked the blanket around his mother again. Something inside him shifted quietly in that moment. Because for the first time in years, he realized someone in this house was giving without expecting anything in return. Downstairs, family members constantly asked him for money, approval, or power. But Claire Bennett asked for nothing except enough work to keep her daughter fed. And somehow, that honesty felt rarer than anything his fortune had ever bought. The following week brought a strange transformation to the Caldwell estate, and everyone inside the mansion noticed it whether they admitted it or not. Eleanor began eating full meals again. She asked for her curtains opened every morning so sunlight could enter the room. She even requested fresh flowers beside her bed, something the staff said she had not cared about in years. But what shocked the household most was that Eleanor no longer spent her days in silence. Laughter drifted from her room almost daily now, usually followed by Lily's excited voice or Claire reading aloud from one of Eleanor's favorite books. For the first time in a very long time, the upstairs bedroom felt less like a waiting room for death and more like part of a living home. Unfortunately, not everyone welcomed the change. Vanessa watched everything carefully with growing resentment. The more Eleanor smiled around Claire, the colder Vanessa became. One afternoon, Claire entered the kitchen carrying Eleanor's tea tray and immediately noticed the room fall silent. Two relatives stopped talking the moment she walked in. A maid avoided eye contact completely. Claire pretended not to notice while preparing the tea exactly the way Eleanor liked it, with one spoonful of honey and a small slice of lemon. But as she turned to leave, she heard Vanessa's voice behind her. "It is honestly embarrassing how obvious she is." Claire froze briefly but kept walking. Another woman laughed quietly. "You think she is after Ethan?" Vanessa scoffed. "Please. Women like Claire are always after survival. Billionaires are just the shortcut." Claire kept moving without reacting, but every word landed painfully. She had spent years being judged before people even knew her name. Single mother. Divorced. Struggling. In wealthy circles, those labels often became character flaws. Upstairs, Eleanor immediately noticed Claire's silence. "What happened?" she asked softly. Claire forced a smile while placing the tea beside the bed. "Nothing important." Eleanor watched her carefully for several seconds. "When a woman says that with tired eyes, it is always important." Claire looked down at the carpet. "Your family thinks I am trying to take advantage of this situation." Eleanor sighed heavily as though she had expected it. "My family measures everyone by money because they do not understand anything else anymore." Claire sat quietly beside the window. "I do not want problems here. I just need this job." Eleanor reached for her hand gently. "No, Claire. What you need is dignity. There is a difference." Before Claire could answer, Lily burst into the room holding a small stack of drawings. "Miss Ellie, I made you something." Eleanor smiled instantly. "Another masterpiece?" Lily proudly climbed onto the bed and showed her colorful drawings of the three of them standing beneath a giant tree. Above their heads she had written in crooked letters, "Family." Claire felt emotion catch unexpectedly in her throat. Eleanor stared at the picture for a long moment before quietly asking Lily, "Why did you write family?" Lily shrugged innocently. "Because families are the people who make you feel loved." The room fell silent after that. Claire looked away quickly, pretending to organize medication bottles because her eyes suddenly burned with tears. That evening, Ethan returned home earlier than usual and found Claire alone in the library reviewing Eleanor's medication schedule, while Lily slept curled beside her on the sofa. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows again, and the mansion felt unusually peaceful. Ethan loosened his tie as he stepped inside. "You are still awake?" Claire looked up tiredly. "Eleanor had a difficult afternoon. I wanted to monitor her medications carefully." Ethan nodded slowly before noticing the overdue bill sticking halfway out of Claire's folder. "Past due final notice" was printed clearly across the top. Claire quickly slid the paper away, embarrassed. Ethan pretended not to notice, but his expression changed slightly. "You work too much," he said quietly. Claire almost laughed at the irony. That tends to happen when rent keeps increasing. Ethan remained silent for a moment before speaking carefully. "The agency contract I offered includes a housing allowance." Claire looked surprised. "I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity," Ethan replied calmly. "It is compensation for demanding work." Claire studied him carefully. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan looked toward the dark hallway outside the library. "Because my mother smiles when you walk into the room." The honesty in his voice caught Claire off guard. Before she could respond, the library door suddenly opened. Vanessa stood there holding a small velvet jewelry box, her face tense with anger. "Has anyone seen Mother's sapphire brooch?" she asked sharply. Claire shook her head immediately. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. It disappeared this afternoon." Ethan frowned slightly. "Vanessa, do not start." But Vanessa stepped farther into the room, staring directly at Claire now. The maid said Claire was the last person near Mother's dresser. Claire felt her stomach drop instantly. "I did not take anything." Vanessa crossed her arms slowly. Then I guess you will not mind if we search your bag. Silence filled the library. Claire stared at Vanessa in disbelief while Lily slept only a few feet away, completely unaware of the humiliation unfolding around her. Ethan looked uncomfortable, caught between suspicion and instinct. Claire slowly stood to her feet, her voice quiet but shaking slightly. I have taken care of your mother every single day while this family ignored her. And now you think I stole from her? Vanessa's expression remained cold. People become desperate when they are poor. Claire looked toward Ethan then, hoping he would say something. Anything. But he hesitated just long enough for her heart to break a little. The entire sitting room fell into stunned silence after Mr. Harrison announced Claire and Lily's names. Claire immediately felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some looked confused. Others looked openly irritated. Vanessa sat upright in disbelief while Ethan remained completely still beside her, his expression unreadable. Claire tightened her grip on Lily's hand. There must be some mistake, she whispered softly. Mr. Harrison adjusted the papers in front of him. There is no mistake, Miss Bennet. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. This is absurd. Mr. Harrison calmly continued reading. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell left the majority of Caldwell Industries voting shares to her son Ethan Caldwell, who will remain acting chief executive officer of the company. Several relatives visibly relaxed at those words. Vanessa leaned back slightly with smug satisfaction returning to her face. But then Mr. Harrison continued. However, Mrs. Caldwell also created a separate charitable trust under the name Eleanor Grace Foundation. The attorney paused briefly before looking directly at Claire again. Control of this foundation and its associated assets will be granted to Miss Claire Bennet. The room exploded with shocked voices instantly. What? You cannot be serious. A caregiver? Vanessa stood to her feet so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. This is manipulation, she snapped. She manipulated a dying woman. Claire's face turned pale. I never asked for anything. Mr. Harrison raised his voice firmly over the chaos. Mrs. Caldwell anticipated objections, which is why she attached a personal statement to be read aloud. The room slowly quieted again. Mr. Harrison unfolded a handwritten letter and began reading Eleanor's words. To my family, if you are angry reading this, ask yourselves one simple question. Which one of you sat beside my bed when cameras were gone and parties ended? Which one of you cared whether I felt lonely? Claire Bennet entered this house with almost nothing, yet somehow gave more of herself than people surrounded by wealth their entire lives. Claire immediately lowered her eyes as tears formed again. Across the room, Ethan listened silently while guilt darkened his expression. Mr. Harrison continued reading. Money reveals character. It does not create it. And in my final weeks, a tired single mother and her little girl reminded me what love actually looks like. That is why I trust Claire to run the foundation that will provide housing assistance and caregiving support for struggling families and elderly people abandoned by those who should love them. Silence settled heavily over the room now. Even the relatives who had been whispering moments earlier no longer spoke. Mr. Harrison lowered the letter slightly before continuing. Mrs. Caldwell also established a fully funded educational trust for Lily Bennet through graduate school. Lily looked up at Claire in confusion. What does that mean? Claire could barely speak through emotion. It means Miss Ellie wanted to help take care of your future. Lily clutched the folded drawing in her hands tighter while tears filled her small eyes. Vanessa looked furious. This is insane. She barely knew these people. Ethan finally stood slowly from his chair. Actually, he said quietly, they knew my mother better than any of us did. Vanessa turned toward him in disbelief. You cannot seriously support this. Ethan looked around the massive sitting room, at the expensive suits, polished jewelry, and cold faces surrounding him. Then he looked toward Claire standing quietly near the back, still looking more uncomfortable than triumphant. My mother spent years surrounded by people waiting for her to die so they could inherit something, Ethan said calmly. Claire was the only person who showed up expecting nothing. Nobody answered him. Because deep down, everyone in the room knew he was right. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat once more. There is one final item. He reached for another sealed envelope. This message is addressed specifically to Ethan Caldwell. Ethan accepted the letter silently and opened it with careful hands. As he read, his expression slowly changed from grief to something softer, almost broken. After a long moment, he finally looked up toward Claire. My mother wrote that I spent my entire life protecting the family business while forgetting to protect the people inside it. Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes again. Ethan folded the letter carefully before walking across the room toward her. Every relative watched in complete silence. When he finally stopped in front of Claire, his voice came low and sincere. I should have trusted you. Claire looked at him quietly. Your mother did. Ethan nodded slowly, emotion visible in his eyes now. And she was almost always right. Beside them, Lily suddenly stepped forward holding her drawing from upstairs. Miss Ellie said family means people who make you feel loved, she whispered softly. Ethan stared at the child for several seconds before kneeling slightly to her level. Your Miss Ellie was a very wise woman. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Claire no longer felt small standing inside the mansion. Not because of money. Not because of the inheritance. But because Eleanor Caldwell had given her something even more valuable before she died. Proof that kindness still mattered in a world obsessed with status. And as the cold silence of the Caldwell family faded around them, Claire finally understood something Eleanor had known all along. The richest people are not the ones who own the most. They are the ones who leave love behind after they are gone.